I was sitting in the living room, the soft yellow light casting a gentle glow on the book in my hands. Outside, it was completely dark, and the chirping of insects drifted in from the quiet garden. My parents were away on a business trip, leaving me alone in the large house. Truth be told, I was used to it. From a young age, these solitary nights at home had become a part of my life. I enjoyed the tranquility and freedom they brought. Around 9 p.m., I heard a soft rustling sound coming from outside the living room window. At first, I thought it was just the wind blowing through the leaves, but the noise repeated itself as if someone was deliberately making it. I gently closed my book and listened intently. The rustling sound came again, this time clearer, accompanied by the faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel in front of the house. My heart began to beat faster. I stood up, quietly moved towards the window and peeked through the curtains. Darkness enveloped the garden, with only the weak light from the street lamp filtering through. I couldn't see anyone. Maybe I'm just imagining things, I thought to myself, trying to reassure myself. But a feeling of unease still crept into my heart. I decided to check around the house. Taking a flashlight with me, I opened the front door and stepped outside. The cool night breeze brushed against my skin, making me shiver. I shone the flashlight around the garden, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The gate was still tightly closed, and the sturdy fence surrounded the house. Everything seemed normal, yet the feeling of being watched lingered. As I turned back towards the front door, I suddenly noticed something amiss. The wooden door, which was always carefully locked, was now ajar. I was startled and quickly pushed the door open, stepped inside, slammed it shut, and bolted it. My palms were clammy with sweat. What is happening? I ran quickly into the living room and locked the living room door. Looking through the keyhole, I saw darkness engulfing the hallway. The house that was once so familiar now felt strange and frightening. I took out my phone, intending to call my parents, but then hesitated. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Could just be the wind blowing the door open. But my intuition told me otherwise. Something was not right. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the still night. I was horrified to realize that someone had broken into the house. My heart seemed to stop. I quickly turned off the living room light and hid behind the large sofa. Darkness enveloped me, with only the pounding of my heart echoing in my chest. I heard heavy footsteps entering the house and indistinct whispering voices. They were inside the house, just outside the living room. Trembling, I took out my phone, my clumsy fingers fumbling to dial 113. My voice faltered as I tried to explain the situation to the operator. Meanwhile, the footsteps grew closer and closer to the living room. The living room door was yanked violently, the sound of the lock rattling resoundingly. I held my breath, squeezed my eyes shut, and waited for the worst to happen. The door burst open, and a flashlight beam shone directly into my face. "Don't move," a gruff male voice growled. I opened my eyes and saw two tall, burly men, their faces masked, standing right in front of me. They were holding flashlights and something glinting in their hands, probably a knife. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to utter a word. "Where are your parents?" one of them asked, his voice cold. "Don't hide anything, we know they are home." I stammered, My parents are away." They exchanged glances, their eyes scrutinizing me. "Where did they go?" They went on a business trip." One of the men approached me, pressing the tip of a knife against my neck. "Don't lie. Tell the truth, where are your parents?" I felt the cold blade against my skin, and my fear reached its peak. I knew my life was in danger. What should I do? Just then, the piercing sound of a siren wailed from afar, growing louder and louder. The two men flinched, exchanging panicked glances. The police sirens. They quickly turned and fled, rushing out the back door. I heard their footsteps running away, and then the sound of police cars stopping in front of the house. The living room door burst open, light flooded in, and the police officers appeared, rescuing me from this terrifying nightmare. But even though the police had arrived and caught the intruders, I could never forget the feeling of utter terror that night. The question of their true motive and whether they would return haunted me for a long time afterward. It all began on a cold autumn night when I agreed to house sit for Aunt Linda while she visited relatives back in her hometown. Her house was located in a remote suburb where streetlights were scarce and an eerie tranquility always permeated the atmosphere. I wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen, just a peaceful week of Netflix, junk food, and the plush sofa in the living room. However, even now, I still wonder if I was truly alone that night. Around 1 in the morning, I was still awake, curled up in a thick duvet, my eyes glued to my phone screen. The single desk lamp in the room cast a warm yellow light, but it didn't seem to be enough to dispel the bone-chilling cold seeping through the window cracks. The bare branches outside the porch trembled in the strong wind, creating soft, clicking sounds. In the distance, a dog barked aimlessly but quickly fell silent, giving way to absolute quiet. And then the knocking began. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my chest. Who could be visiting at this hour? I sat still for a moment trying to listen. There was no car sound, no footsteps moving away. All there was an extended silence, as if the darkness outside was holding its breath, waiting. I slowly got up and walked to the window beside me. The curtains were only half drawn, leaving a small gap to peek out at the front porch. Under the dim moonlight, Aunt Linda's porch was still empty. No one was there. I swallowed hard, trying to reassure myself that it was just tree branches hitting the door or the strong wind rattling the wooden frame. But just as I turned back towards the sofa, this time the knocking came from the back door. A jolt of icy coldness ran down my spine. The back door was on the opposite side of the living room, meaning if someone was knocking there, they would have had to walk around the house in just a few seconds. Instinctively, I felt something was very wrong. This time, I didn't approach the window again. I immediately switched off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. It felt as if by standing visibly like this, someone or something out there would know I was here. I held my breath, listening. Only the wind whistled through the window cracks and dry leaves rustled on the wooden porch. I retreated slowly towards the bedroom, my trembling hand reaching for my phone. I wanted to call my aunt, but realized she was in an area with no reception. I considered calling the police but then hesitated. What would I tell them? That someone knocked but left no trace? And then, just as I was about to turn and run, I heard breathing, right outside the window. Slow. Almost inhuman. I didn't have time to think. I darted into the bedroom, locked the door, and crawled under the bed. I tried to stifle my breath, listening for any sound from outside. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Then I heard a click, the sound of the doorknob being tested. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the door was securely locked. My hand clutched my phone, trying not to miss any sound. And then, something chuckled softly outside. Not a loud laugh or a giggle. It was a dry, drawn-out sound, as if coming from an old, breath-depleted throat. I don't know how long I lay still like that, but eventually, everything fell silent again. The next morning, when the sun was up, I slowly crept out of the bedroom, my heart still racing. I checked all the doors and windows, they were still tightly locked. There were no signs of forced entry. But when I pulled up the living room window blinds, I saw them. Black, smudged handprints imprinted on the glass. They were larger than normal human hands. Longer. I left Aunt Linda's house that very morning. Aunt Linda didn't believe me when I recounted everything, saying it was probably someone's old handprints that I hadn't noticed before. But I knew the truth, because as I drove away, I saw those handprints freshly appear on my car window, and this time they were facing inward. The winter wind howled in mournful gusts through the towering eucalyptus trees, contorting them like specters on the barren hilltop. My grandmother's small wooden house nestled amidst the woods, the faint yellow lamplight spilling from the window like the weak eyes of a cat in the thick darkness. Inside, the wood stove crackled merrily, casting dancing streaks of light onto the smoke-stained walls. The scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and decaying leaves mingled together, creating a distinct aroma of the remote countryside on a winter night. Grandmother sat at the table, her slender, bony hands deftly picking vegetables. I meanwhile, huddled by the stove, wrapped myself in a thick woolen blanket, trying to ward off the bone-chilling cold. The air was thick with a silence so dense it was almost suffocating, just waiting for an unusual sound to tear it apart. Suddenly, amidst the howling wind, I heard a strange sound. A soft, rhythmic sound, as if someone was walking on the dry leaves outside the porch. I looked up at grandmother. She had also paused, listening intently. Her deep-set eyes stared intently towards the dark window. The rustling grew clearer, accompanied by the snap of small twigs breaking. A spine-chilling sensation spread through my body. Cold sweat broke out, and my hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the blanket tightly. The space inside the house seemed to grow colder, even though the stove was still burning. Grandmother slowly stood up and deliberately walked to the window, her face etched with worry. She gently drew back the heavy burlap curtain, peering out. I held my breath, watching her every move, my heart pounding as if it would leap out of my chest. Grandmother stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly lowered the curtain. Her face was ashen, devoid of color. There's someone out there," she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. It seems they're looking into our house." Her words struck me like a bucket of ice water. I felt a chilling draft run down my spine, and goosebumps erupted all over my skin. In the dim light of the house, I imagined pairs of eyes watching us from outside, unseen, cold and menacing eyes. She slowly turned back and walked to my side. She took my icy hand in hers, squeezing it tightly as if to transmit some warmth and courage to me. "It's all right, my dear," she said, her voice trying to reassure, but I still detected the tremor in it. "We'll be okay." But in the thick darkness, amidst the eerie howling wind and the mysterious sounds outside the porch, I couldn't believe grandmother's words. Deep in my young heart, I knew that something very frightening was about to happen tonight. And in this small wooden house amidst the desolate woods, only my grandmother and I were facing the darkness and the unseen horror lurking outside. Suddenly, the rustling was no longer a soft sound. It became heavy, brutal footsteps trampling on the dry leaves, heading straight for the front door. The footsteps grew closer, more urgent, making my heart feel like it was about to stop. Then the silence was shattered by a terrifying. The flimsy wooden door shuddered violently, the wood groaning as if about to break. Grandmother and I jumped, instinctively hugging each other, a scream stuck in our throats. Continuous, powerful blows hammered at the door, as if trying to smash everything to pieces. The wooden door buckled, and paint chips rained down onto the floor. I looked at grandmother, her eyes wide with terror, the wrinkles on her forehead furrowed tightly. In the flickering lamplight, her face became distorted, contorted by utter fear. Suddenly, grandmother released my hand. She stood up straight and strode quickly towards the kitchen. In the dim light, I saw her reach for something on the stove rack. When she turned back, I recognized it as a large meat cleaver, its blade gleaming chillingly sharp. "Stay here, don't come out," Grandmother whispered, her voice resolute, but still betraying her tremor. She walked towards the door, the meat cleaver held firmly in her hand, her eyes unusually determined and resilient. I trembled and sat frozen, not daring to breathe loudly. The door pounding continued, but seemed to weaken. Perhaps the figures outside hadn't expected anyone inside this small wooden house to dare fight back. Silence. A terrifying silence enveloped everything. Only the wind howling outside and the frantic thumping of my heart in my chest remained. I held my breath and listened intently, trying to distinguish every slightest sound. Then I heard footsteps receding into the distance. The rustling on the dry leaves also faded, then disappeared completely. The whole house fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, a silence heavy and tense to the point of suffocation. Grandmother still stood motionless by the door, the meat cleaver still gripped tightly in her hand. After a long while she slowly turned back. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were less strained. She sighed and let the cleaver drop onto the table. "It seems they're gone," she said, her voice hoarse and weary. Perhaps they've given up." I slowly stood up and walked to Grandmother's side. My legs trembled, my steps faltering. I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her bony shoulder, tears welling up. I was both terrified and grateful to her, and felt incredibly fortunate to have her by my side during this terrifying night. Grandmother hugged me back tightly, gently patting my back. It's all right, it's all over," she whispered, her voice warm and soothing. "There's nothing to be afraid of anymore." But I knew, even though those frightening figures had left, this night would forever be an unforgettable night in my life. The smell of wood smoke, the howling wind, the terrifying door pounding, Grandmother's pale face, the gleaming meat cleaver, all those images and sounds would forever haunt me in my long night dreams.